Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ventures. I'm excited about today's episode with Jenna Langer. We talk about all things product, and her story is incredible. From preparing to be in startup land to growing a startup, having it be successfully acquired by Adobe, what she learned in her years in an enterprise environment at Adobe. And we talk about the nuances around product management, product marketing, how to think about a market effectively to identify and solve problems. And so if you're listening to this show, you can also watch by visiting wclittle.com, and there you'll see more extensive show notes to the things that we talk about today. And if you're watching, you can also listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can just search for Ventures. So with that, please enjoy this conversation with Jenna Langer. All right, Jenna, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to jump in.
I'm excited for this episode for a variety of reasons. A lot of founders listening to the show often have questions about the dance between growth and product. And I'm I admire your career thus far in terms of how you've been able to conduct and act in that dance yourself. So love to just start tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, it's quite the dance, I'd say. So I've spent the last 11 years on my startup through acquisition journey, and have played a number of different roles along the way. I've loved the startup scene and wearing a lot of different hats, and have kind of developed my skill set over time in the product and marketing area, but really enjoy being a generalist overall. So I started as the first employee of Livefyre. We were a user-generated content platform that was helping brands and publishers bring more engagement and community to their owned and operated properties. So did that for 6 years. We grew the company to 150 people. I played kind of every different role on the business side along the way until we were acquired by Adobe in 2016. So I got to, do the crazy growth stages, the roller coaster of a startup, and then join, a really amazing enterprise company and learn a whole different set of skills, focus more on the internal side of things potentially than the customer facing side, and enjoyed the product marketing and great company from that standpoint until I really realized that I was ready to try something new. So I took some time off in the last several months and have now just jumped into consulting and going back to my startup roots, which I realized I was really missing, being able to be hands-on and being able to take everything that I learned over the last 11 years and apply it into solving new, really interesting problems.
Nice. Did you know as a kid that you'd be getting into startup land, entrepreneurial land? Did you have skills that you had developed or personality traits that you had as a kid that you think carried forward, or was this something that came later in life?
I think I did have traits, but I didn't necessarily know what a lot of these things were when I was younger. Both of my parents were in the medical field. My dad was a chiropractor. My mom was a nurse. So I have, my 6-year-old drawing self of, I wanted to be just like my dad and be a chiropractor. But I was always really interested in technology. And I started a few things here and there where I'd say my leadership skills started to show, where maybe it wasn't necessarily, starting my own little business, but it was things like starting a petition at school because we wanted to be able to bring our backpacks to class and not have to carry our books all the time, or, raising money for a charity or for the local food drive. So played a lot of sports as well. And I just always loved being on a team, and working with other people and kind of identifying, where we needed to focus our attention next. And I'd say when I was younger as well, I did some courses as far as young girls and leadership and technology and just showing them what was out there.
Yeah.
So I did get my eyes open in interesting ways. I did something with Autodesk when I was maybe 9. And I think we had a woman CEO at that point. And I just remember her saying something about like, you all can get here. And like, my paycheck has a lot of zeros on it. Um, and I didn't really even know. I was like, okay, so there are paths. There's a lot of opportunity here. And I was very fortunate that my parents as well were ones that encouraged that, and they,
Mm.
saw potential and told me that I could do anything. I was a big tomboy as well,
Mm.
which I think goes to the aspect of I saw boys doing things and said, "Why aren't there any girls doing that? Like
Mm.
that looks really fun. Why can't I go do that?"
Mm.
And I actually see how that's taken me a lot through my career as well, of just always ready to raise my hand and say, "Yes, I want to try. Like I want to do something. I want to work hard and put myself out there."
So the journey leading into your experience at Livefyre, what was before that? What kind of things were you up to personally, professionally, that kind of prepared you for that stage in your journey?
Yeah, I'm a continual learner. I was even when I was in college, I did a couple of internships and was always trying to figure out like what experience do I need to get to what that next step is,
Mm.
and even figure out what career opportunities there were. So I studied digital media, and what I found as far as getting experience outside of the traditional realm was volunteering for things. So I volunteered to help at a UX conference because that
Mm.
was an area that I was interested in, and went there and started networking and kind of learning different aspects as far as like just how much knowledge was out there. And that really, I think, sparked my interest as far as seeing that there were so many smart people and a way of learning that was not traditional education. And that was really insightful to me. And then pairing that with the growth of social media at the exact same time. So as I was coming up through school, Twitter was starting to become a really big thing, and just even understanding like this is a really different way to communicate. Um, the early days of like Second Life and virtual worlds that I think were almost a little ahead of their time in certain
Mm.
capacities.
Hmm.
Just the idea of how the internet and just technology altogether facilitated human communication was the thing that really sparked my passion for the web and where I wanted to go. um, and it was interesting because I always thought that Google is what I wanted to do and where I wanted to work. So
Mm.
I went to some of these conferences and I go up and talk to people and say like, hey, this is what I want to do. I went to a state school. I don't have some Ivy League education or things like that that's just going to get me hired right away. So how can I follow this path? And everyone said, go work at a startup. That's where you're going to get the hands-on experience and really start learning things. So I was actually studying abroad in Australia. I took an extra semester because I could and I wanted to travel. And when I was there, I found a digital media conference that was all about how social media was changing news and changing the media, traditional media as a whole, and just that disruption that was really ripe at this moment in time. Blogging was becoming like a
Mm.
new thing as far as it's not just the standard traditional news outlets. So that was another area where I said, hey, can I help? Like, you don't need to pay me anything. I just want to help and be
Mm.
around this energy. Um,
Mhm.
and that exposed me to a whole new, set of people, set of technologies. And um, as I was getting ready to finish this semester, and it was like, okay, where am I going to go? What's my next career opportunity? The fun part that I think you'll enjoy is I was actually exploring working at a ski resort. I
Aha.
sent cover letters to every ski resort saying, hey, I think you need a social media person. I know this is new, like this is a new way of communicating that you're probably not used to, but there's an opportunity, and I think this is something that you should be looking for. Um, I got to the final step to be the snow reporter for Big Sky
Oh.
Mountain in Montana, and was like, super excited about it. And then it came down to like the final stuff, and he's like, okay, we really like you and everything, and just some things that we want to be clear on is you're going to be up by yourself at 4:30 in the morning, going on the mountain to do these things and report out. And we're going to pay you $7.25 an hour. I'm like, okay, so I can make more money babysitting. So that scenario, I was like, okay, this is a passion of mine. This isn't going to work. That's not even going to pay the bills for this kind of mountain town. And a little bit after that, I came across Livefyre in its very first iteration, which was a real-time conversation platform. Mm-hmm. And I immediately saw what it could be and the potential behind it, and reached out to the founder. And then when I came back to the States, I grew up in Marin County. So I got to go back, right to the heart of the Bay Area, and to get myself exposed to everything that was going on there and figure out my next job opportunity, and met with the CEO and came with a list of ideas of how I thought the platform could be used. And he's like, all right, this is great. So getting ready to leave. And he's like, so, as we think about next steps, like, I don't have any funding yet, so there's no money. Do you want to be an intern? And I told him, I said, you don't have to pay me, but I will not be called an intern. I was ready for the startup world. I was ready to go all in. But I was also kind of realizing like I have more value to offer. And I see that I see the long-term path here and opportunity, and I'm willing to invest myself. But I want to invest myself as, someone that can, come to the table and start producing, not just an intern that's, you need to manage and is adding just minimal value.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, no, that's great. So that what I picked up in the story is the intuition that you had to not only get up to speed on what was going on in the world and the internet, but the intuition around specifically why Livefyre, like what. And enough to go and research and come with a list and meet with the CEO. What was that intuition? Like, you don't necessarily need to get into specifics, although I'm curious with Livefyre in itself. But what was the intuition that said, yes, I'm going to invest? Because that was an investment decision that you made. What was it that prompted that?
Yeah, I mean, I am very fortunate that I was in a position that I could invest, right? I didn't have debt. I didn't need to necessarily get paid right away. Yeah. I understand my privilege in that capacity for sure. The founder, Jordan, was a great pitch person. He had a ton of passion as well. And I was really exploring a lot of just how the internet was being used at this point in time and seeing the constant change. So, early days, like my dad had me on CompuServe and introduced me to forums and things like that back when I was in elementary school. And just the idea of connecting to people across the globe, like, blew my mind. And then I come to this point at the end of college where you're actually able to be online and have real-time conversations about topics that matter. And this isn't through like this really discombobulated Twitter feed, because it was before hashtags and @ mentions and things like that were actually features. It's moving things out of just instant message and conversations that you might be having with friends. And I saw that there was so much community to be built on the internet, and just connecting with people that I could, had never met before, maybe didn't know anything about, but all of a sudden the internet was facilitating this, and we're having these like deep conversations and learning from each other. And to me, that was just eye-opening, and the idea around how the general public could now be part of this conversation. There were some pivotal moments that I saw on social media as well that kind of changed my perspective. One of them was when the plane crashed into the Hudson River. the image that went out on news from that was a tweet. It was on TwitPic, and it was someone that was on the ferry that was going to pick up passengers from that.
Mm-hmm.
And that moment was like, social media is going to change the world.
Mm.
I was very optimistic about it at that point in time. So it's interesting that, 15 years later, we're in a very different state.
Right.
But it was things like that. And then when I saw Livefyre and then heard the long-term vision of what it was going to be, I saw just so much potential in how it could be used that I just really wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah. So the wearing many hats then. Tell us about the story of coming into a startup, being able to be in a position where you're not getting paid at first. So that the compensation in and of itself is probably an interesting story. But the hats that you wore to then help the company grow, what was that like?
Yeah, so when we started, it was myself, the CEO, and 2 engineers. And CEO is non-technical, so he is definitely more on the business side, but like product design centric as well. So obviously could speak the tech. And then as we grew the team, we grew engineering first. It was like build, build, build. We were solving some hard technical problems as well, and that was like part of our prototypes that we needed to get funding.
Hmm.
So at that point for me, it was kind of like, okay, like what can I do? Let's just start. And a lot of that was, community support from the beginning. It was helping with reporting bugs, and I don't think I knew what I was doing at the time, but it was product management. It was customer support. It was sales and marketing. So it was kind of at any point in time, what did we need? Okay, we need a pitch deck, and we need it to be different for the consumer audience than for the publisher audience.
Right.
And we're also building this out for our investors at the same time. So let's go find some research. Let's, build out the story, and let's, start getting it out there. Let's talk to our community, and get them really engaged, and make sure that we're providing them the best support possible to help with our growth. And then as the company grew, or I guess I should say more as our product adoption grew, we started to see the next needs. Like, okay, so we need to start selling, and we need to start to put together a proposal. All right, we closed our first customers. I guess we need account management now. This customer is actually going to pay us to build the next part of our product. We need to spec that. We need to manage it with them directly. We need to translate that to the engineers. And we're going to do this all while closing the next round of funding. And, there may have been other elements too, as far as like office management type aspects of, let's keep the fridge stocked, or if the engineers are going to stay here all night long, I need to make sure that I'm here supporting them and being productive. So it really just depended on our need at any moment in time, and then we could kind of we're ready to hire subject matter experts in those, and then I might go on to solving the next problem. So I think I looked at it much more of, what problem am I solving next, versus what role am I actually, playing?
Yeah, that's good. So then from an education standpoint, having gone through all of that, how now do you think about the worlds of user experience, consumer experience, market insights, talking to customers, design, product management? Those are terms that people are often very not familiar with, or even how it all works. They're very similar to how you were just in there solving problems. How do you think about it now? For if you were to talk to founders that were in the situation that you all were in back in the day, how do you frame it now?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting going from where I was at Adobe for the last 4 years to now working with startups again. Because it is a balance between the frameworks and process and getting stuff done.
Right.
And it's very easy to overcorrect in either direction. So for me, I think the key things that I've learned is I think it's very helpful to have frameworks and hypotheses documented.
Hmm.
Say, here is where I see an opportunity. Here's the problems that I think that we're solving. Let's start writing those down and actually validating them with data in some way. Um, Now, data can mean so many things, and in the startup world, a lot of that is more qualitative than quantitative.
Mm-hmm.
Having those conversations with your early customers. Why is someone not going to switch to your platform yet? Are we actually solving a problem for you, or is this just something that we think is cool and interesting? So when I look at it now, I think I thought when I saw Startup Rocket, I think what's so great about that is having a framework is incredibly helpful to say, I know these three things, but here's a big gap that I have that I think is going to block us from getting to the next level.
Mm.
So let's maybe focus some attention on, this area of conversion on our website or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think having those frameworks and methods for making decisions is something that we lacked in those early days. We were just go, 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 build, build, build. And it worked, it came together. But I think we worked a lot harder than
Mm.
we needed to because we weren't leveraging frameworks that I think, obviously existed already. So that's where I really see it's helpful to have that, forest through the trees idea and understanding like, okay, here's where I think we are and here's where we're going to go. But then also being able to be very nimble and flexible within the process and say like, it's okay if we don't fill every single one of these. Like we're not going for perfection here. We're going for, iteration and progress.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the shout out on Startup Rocket. That is why we built it, is because we kept seeing founders reinvent the wheel over and over and over again, and just inefficiency in spend, inefficiency in time. Where these are, I wanted to just shout it from the rooftops. These problems have been solved. Learn from others. Stand on the shoulders of giants, and because you're going to have a whole host of your own problems, and then hopefully you can pay it forward to the next, so that the next founder, so we can empower more founders all around the world to do their best work and create value for themselves, their teams, their families, their communities, the customers, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been the whole vision. So then what I often say, I'm curious from your perspective, as you work now with different startup teams, and as you've seen the composition of person number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that team composition and what holes in terms of capabilities and know-how in those teams, where do you see their common holes in those early stage startups that especially CEOs now should be aware of?
Yeah, I think one term that I heard recently that I thought was a perfect description as far as like a startup employee that you're looking for is someone that can grow themselves into that next role.
Mm.
Where I've worked with different people where there's some people that have a specialty in a certain size and growth stage of company. So it might be like, I'm really good at growing the company from $1 to $10 million in revenue, or from 20 to 40 people. But then that 40 to 100 people is a very different stage, or that 100 to 200 people is also a very different stage and a different skill set required. I think one of the things that's interesting to me is that I ended up in product marketing is that is a role that I think is a great early hire that can be overlooked. And it's really about understanding your market. I think, a lot of times it depends on what types of founders they are, right? Are you a technical founder that you're just out there building product? And you build it, there's great features, you know that people need them, but why do people need them? Or what problem are we actually solving? Like, do we really understand who our customer is? And that is something that I feel like startups can just be going so fast that if you don't have someone that's actually stepping back and looking at that and evaluating it on a regular basis, all of a sudden you can end up on a completely different path because you were listening too much to one squeaky wheel, or you're trying to build a product that serves everyone versus, one specific market. So I think those early startup hires, generalists are very helpful, but people that also kind of understand the process and where they can jump in and help, and that don't need too much direction, I think is super helpful. Trying to think. I mean, another area that I know that we neglected was around like data and analytics and making decisions based on data. So that's something that you don't necessarily need in the very early stage, but I think having someone there that can help make decisions on that can help with, whether it's A/B testing or growth marketing or things like that, I think is a huge value add that more and more startups are definitely looking at. But having that balance between the growth hacker that's doing it more based on data and the process and operations, and the person who's more on the product marketing side that's looking at the strategy, who are the customers we're targeting, what are those problems. I think if you go too much in one direction or the other, you can start to lose sight of where you are, or you're not actually able to get that growth because, sure, I know who my customers are, but now how do I go get them, and how do we get that out there?
And in your experience, what did the support structure around the core team look like? Because often the gaps in understanding are ideally pointed out by advisors and investors and others that are helping kind of craft the future of the growth in the product. But from your experience, what kind of support did you see coming around your startup?
Yeah, we were fortunate that we started in an incubator type space.
Mm-hmm.
It was called Kick Labs. It was an early one. That part of their model was, here's some office space, and we have some support that you can leverage, and will help introduce you and build relationships. So whether that was on the legal side, that might have been on, we weren't ready to hire a salesperson, but we have someone that can start making introductions here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Figuring out what were some of the other aspects. I mean, yeah, the BD side for sure. From, investors and understanding from a technology standpoint, like as we were building some challenging tech, Travis Kalanick was actually one of our angel investors. So he was even able to come in and do some whiteboarding with us on some of these challenges. So we definitely filled gaps with some of these partners in different ways until we were ready to say, okay, we're ready to bring this in-house. We don't need necessarily a PR agency anymore to help us with this. We're ready to, do our own marketing and PR strategy. So it was part of our growth over time.
Got it. Cool. And then just in terms of product, because I come back to this because I just see it over and over again where certain team members of startup think that they're good at product, right? I've said this before on the podcast. Like I went through my own journey as a startup CEO thinking that, oh no, I understand my customers. I understand what product needs to be built. But really not realizing it until I worked with people like you who were actually extremely good at it. How do you teach product? Like how do you even approach the topic of product and product management with the people that you mentor and the colleagues that you work with?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting level as far as when you see like a product management role today, a lot of them are very much in the nitty gritty of like, I'm going to write a bunch of user stories and specs, and, I'm really focused on making engineers productive, right? That's one side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the other side of it is, what product should we build? Why are we building this feature? We have a backlog of all these things. Which ones are actually going to move the needle for our customers? Um, and that is a challenging shift for a lot of people to make.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, with that, I really think one of the reasons that I was successful is how close I was to the customer. Um, and part of that was I was doing account management, I was doing sales, right? Like the benefit of being in a startup and playing all these roles is I could have extreme empathy for them because I was in those conversations on a daily basis. So I think asking questions and just getting as much understanding as possible, and asking why the 5 times versus just one, for what it's actually going to do for that customer is a huge thing. And then how you kind of can document that and turn it into process. I think one of the things I realized later too is that there is an intuition side of it, but there are ways to actually make this like a quantifiable process in collecting this information. Some of it might be very back of the envelope of just like, we look at a specific feature and we say like, what's the impact it's going to have? High, medium, low, right? That could be a way that we're kind of saying, okay, I think this.
Mm.
But you might actually know the impact even more if they're able to quantify it and say like, I know I could make more revenue if I had this feature.
Hmm.
Or actually understanding how that can relate to the company's business objectives. And then the other side of that as well is then is looking at like the frequency and quantity of customers that might have this challenge. And not just looking at existing customers, but maybe deals that you lost, potential customers that you haven't even talked to yet,
Hmm.
and doing some research to get that information. And then you actually can start to build it into a framework where, you can look at impact times quantity and start to prioritize these things based on some metrics. Um, and that's, I think, can be a great learning process for someone earlier, that then they're going to be able to build that muscle and understand which questions that to ask that might be more impactful or get more of that information out, that's going to make it down the road that they can do it more off of their intuition versus like, okay, I need to look at all these, spreadsheets and how it works. So that might be at a little later stage of a startup. But I think as I look at startups now, it's like, why not start some of that stuff early? Like get
Yes.
stuff written down. I
Yeah.
think that big thing too is like institutional knowledge is, a huge value in an early startup employee. But if you can't take a day off because you're the only one that can answer that question, that's a problem.
Yes.
And that's how you also then, if you actually have it documented, other people can absorb that a lot more and start asking smart questions.
I think the way that you describe the skill stack for a product manager and a product person is spot on. So those who are listening, those who are watching, go back and rewind and listen to that again, because I just, from my experience, so many founder teams get that wrong, and they don't realize, even coming into their Series A, they don't realize the gaping holes that are in their team with regard to that. Now, on top of this, there's the growth aspect, right? So not only are you extremely experienced and thoughtful on the whole product stack, but how do you think about this at the different stages of a growing startup? How do you think about this with regard to the dance that we referred to earlier between product and growth?
Yeah, I think it all goes back to knowing your target market and how narrow or wide you want that to be, or how narrow or wide it should be.
Mm.
And I think that's, in early days we were trying to go, actually no, I should say in early days we were very focused on, we are going to we need bloggers to install our commenting platform. And this kind of, as I say that, you're like, wait, that's not the company that you described at the beginning. We made some pivots along the way to kind of figure out our growth and
Right.
where the opportunity was.
Right.
But very focused at that point on, we need to grow this to get to our net, to prove that this product is valuable and to be able to then even sell it to an enterprise. So we were very focused on that growth aspect and built into our product in ways that we weren't calling it growth hacking or anything, but it was someone installed this plugin on their WordPress site and people signed up to comment on the blog. Now, by signing up to create an account, it was a lot of other bloggers that were commenting and they were like, oh, this is interesting. Maybe I should put this on my site. And that it had a bit of a viral effect there that helped that growth. So we were really focused on nurturing each of those early installs to make sure they were as successful as possible, because we knew that by them keeping it on their site longer, we were going to get more customers. So that was something where we really could, focus at that standpoint. Then later we started to catch enough attention that, enterprises started to see like, oh, this is disruptive. This is something that we actually think that could change, this could get people back to our media sites again versus them just always going to Facebook to get their news and have a conversation. So once we got more towards that enterprise side, we kind of had to almost pause on growth for a minute and build enterprise features. So that's, something that we kind of had refocused our attention a bit and said, okay, we need to build this functionality. We were lucky that the first customer said, we'll pay you to build it. So that kind of funded it, but we need advanced moderation tools. We need single sign-on. We need some of these things. So in those first, we kind of did a lot of product development again, work nights and weekends, everything that we could to get to the platform to the next level. And then we started to see success with those customers and we were ready to go out and get introductions to more media companies because we knew we had a product that we could sell. So then it was kind of, okay, growth from that standpoint, let's start talking. And we were lucky from a media company standpoint and some of our investors. It's a small world. They all talk to each other. And once our product was on a site, they could see it and be like, oh, this is interesting. I'm going to reach out to them. So we didn't have to do too much direct marketing at the beginning from that standpoint. But we kind of would keep hitting an inflection point where we're like, all right, I don't know how much more money we can get out of these publishers for this thing. We need to build another product for them and then kind of go back through that cycle. I will say we should have probably paused more than we did. It was like sell. And now all of a sudden we have 10 companies or 10 customers that are all doing something a little bit different.
Yes.
How do we focus our product? And let's keep hiring engineers. Let's hire engineers. Let's, build all the features out there. And that definitely made it challenging to focus. And I think caused us some growth pains for sure.
Yeah. Because one of the things that drives me insane in early stage startup land, both my own companies and others that I'm working with, is the concept of a local maxima. That we may have a product vision, we may have a set of product features, and then we do some growth strategies against that. But I always wonder, like, we're making a lot of decisions based on a relative, statistically speaking, we're making a lot of decisions based on a relatively low number of data points. What if we're climbing the wrong hill? Right? What if this hill over here is way bigger and way better for our startup to pivot into? How do you think about that? How do you juggle that as from your experience in growing startup?
Yeah, I mean, we had that exact problem. Our business was publishers and media companies. And this is at a time that publishers were like not knowing what to do. Their revenue was going down, and we had products that were great for them, but they, how much more money was there for them to spend on these things? And some of it was a nice to have. And we just realized we can't hitch our wagon to if this is the only industry we focus on, we don't think that we're going to hit the revenue and growth goals that we're really going for. And that's when we started to shift and started to see with some, I think maybe once we transitioned to working with more TV brands, it was getting closer to that brand marketer. And that's when we're like, there's the money. The money
Yeah.
is in these brands and marketing. So how do we take our current product and make it work for them? And then how do we need to build on our product for that new market? So that was a very deliberate shift that we made. We hired specific people for that as well to even make those introductions, and we also did a learning process. We did some of it where it was more of like, let's get connections and go talk to these people to try to understand their problems and if our technology can solve it,
Mhm.
and or like what's the gap in our tech that we need to build that's going to get there. So we started to make that shift, and
Mm.
I think we did it somewhat successfully. I think when I look back, the where I see the mistake that we made is we put brands and marketers in one bucket and said, "You're all the same. You all have the same needs, right?"
Understandable. Understandable. Yeah.
That was, and then we ended up with this challenge again where we have, a number of customers, but they're all in different industries within that had different needs, different ways of measuring success. And then all of a sudden we didn't have a product that was great for any of these, and competitors started to pop up that were like, hey, social commerce, we do that really, really well, and we
Yeah.
can prove the ROI on it. And we're like, wait, but our product does everything. um and that was part of our value prop. You can do everything with our platform. And people are like, I don't even know what that means. What does it mean that you can do everything?
Right.
Like, show me how it applies to my business.
Yes.
So we did that like very well on a one-to-one basis, where I actually ran our client strategy team for a long time, because we come in and say, now that I understand your problems, I'm going to show you how you could use our technology and build out custom decks and designs and show them this is what it could look like on your website. And then the light bulb would go off. Problem is that's not scalable.
Mm.
So our solution a lot of times just was to throw people at it versus like, let's pause again, let's reevaluate where we're at, and let's build a product that can scale itself versus it needing to require, a lot of people to even show the value, and
Yeah.
then require um, a lot of work on the customer side as well to get that value.
Yeah. What I'm hearing through your journey and your thoughts here is the desire to pause is really a desire, because I think even hearing your story earlier in your career, the desire to identify and solve problems and the opportunities that are available is key. Because I learned early in my career that I thought I understood the market. I thought I understood what the problems that needed to be solved, but I think my impatience led me to in the classic entrepreneurial thing, just run fast, move fast, break things. Like all these mantras in the industry can be really harmful, because we're running too fast. We're not actually learning, so we're not actually learning what are those problems for us to solve, and that's why we tend to build products that are let's say suboptimal.
Yeah, what's interesting is, I can say a lot of this stuff in hindsight now, and some of these revelations didn't even come to me until like a year ago, maybe,
Mm.
because I started to see like how we were doing certain things at Adobe, the right and the wrong way,
Mm.
um, certain areas of focus. So I was very much that person of like, you just have to work really hard. You just can't leave the office. Like, there's always stuff to do. Just keep working. So I learned a lot from the mistakes that we made along the way. Like, I was that person that couldn't take the vacation because there was too much,
Yeah.
institutional knowledge in my head.
Yeah.
And because we didn't pause to even write down a process to make it easy to onboard new people. So I'm completely guilty of all those mistakes as well, which is also what's drawing me to come back to startup world now, is like, I think I can, provide a lot of value without working 12-hour days. Like, this is, new light bulb. I understand now what experience means compared to, back then, where I was like, I know everything about this product. Like, I should be in all of these things. And now I look back and I'm like, man, I've made myself that bottleneck. Like I understand now how to bring in the right people around you and to build it out in a way that you can, you know, scale without it having to be like scaling by people.
Right, right. So let's talk about the tail end of the startup journey, at least for your company. What was the process like coming into Adobe? Like, first of all, why was Adobe attracted? Why did Adobe acquire? This is probably public info, but what was attractive about it?
Yeah, so Adobe, had a bit of a gap in social, but the where our product was going, and Adobe was actually an investor before
Mhm.
they acquired us, so we'd been working with them. We had a partnership with them where on the B2B side, their enterprise solutions, it was all about digital experience, and one of their solutions was a content management system. Now I don't even think it's more about experience management at this point, as we've gone to so many more channels than just the web.
Mhm.
But the value prop of Adobe there was being able to scale all of these websites and all these digital properties, and to easily make adjustments without needing a tech person to do it, and to
Yes,
create more content faster.
yes.
And Adobe is great in the way of content creators, and they were focused a lot on how the businesses could create this content. Where we came in, and the problem that Livefyre solved was, if brands need to be creating so much more content than they ever needed to before. But do people even care about brand content? Yeah, like I don't, not so much. They care about what their friends have to say,
Yeah.
right? We want the social proof. So we provided a way to bring this user generated content into their content management system, which solved a few problems.
Mm.
One, I don't need to go out and do an expensive photo shoot anymore, because I have my community and my biggest fans creating a bunch of content. So I can save money on content creation.
Mm.
The content is much more real time and relevant. And it's even more impactful because it's other customers talking about why this product is good, or providing that message, which is much more authentic. So we kind of filled that gap to help bring social content to their owned and operated properties, and an easy way to kind of integrate it from an asset management standpoint, and workflows that was going to kind of reimagine how brands would use the Adobe platform in addition to Livefyre. So they saw it as a gap in kind of that real time and user generated content that fit pretty well into that overall strategy.
Very cool. Very cool. So now, what was the transition like for you? How did your job change? What was enterprise life like, and from startup, and what was that whole experience like?
Yeah, I was really ready for this. We've been at Livefyre for 6 years. It was kind of I was figuring out for myself too, like, where do I want to go next, and what is,
Hmm.
like, how do I start to develop a subject matter expertise versus being this generalist.
Mm.
So I was really excited about working for a big company that had resources and all of these things. And I'm like, they're going to give me frameworks, and we're all going to be speaking the same language. And then we get there and I'm like, okay, so, where is this stuff? And they're like, huh? Like, oh, we do it this way. Someone else does it this way. And then they do it this way. And then, okay, how do I publish a white paper? It's not really written down anywhere. And then you talk to a few different people, and it was like, I was like, okay, so they're not like, this isn't the structured world that I thought I would come into.
Ah.
That was pretty eye opening for me, and I think I realized, like, okay, I still got to use my startup skill set here uh,
Hmm.
to get things done. Um, but what was interesting is there were a lot of resources in certain ways. So what I was leading was the integration of our marketing team, our technology stack, and our messaging into the greater Adobe Experience Cloud.
Hmm.
So what was one of the things that I was really excited about, and I actually shifted roles later at Adobe, was we were, Livefyre was somewhat of this point solution in social. and Adobe was solving much bigger marketing problems. So looking at how we solved something across the entire MarTech stack was really interesting, and how we integrated our message into that. So it was, yeah, it was very eye opening. It was really interesting as well. Like, now I have to train a sales force of 2,000 people,
Mm.
uh, and working on redoing pricing models and things like that to really simplify things. Um, it was a lot of new challenges, and I think one of the biggest things that people had told me previously, but I really had to experience it for myself, is how much you do internally versus externally. So before, I could, you'd create a pitch deck and I'm presenting it to a customer the next day. Now it's much more about getting input from all these different people, iterating together, bringing their content in and combining it and changing the message, and then reviewing that with 10 more people. Because if you're going to train a 2,000 person sales team on this, like, that message better be right. Where before, I'd take my couple of sales reps and I'd be like, hey, let's go try this new thing. So for me, that was a big learning and adjustment. And I actually like enjoyed it because it was collaborating with a lot of really smart people that had different perspectives, came from different worlds. And I got to learn a lot from all of them, but also, got to see that we were providing some immediate value too, and filling some gaps.
So then, holistically, if reflecting on your Adobe experience, like what were the, and I know, and it's fascinating actually to hear even the aspects that you already just shared. But if you were to sort of encapsulate it from the frame of going from startup, like what can startup people learn when they do get acquired, or when they do transition into an enterprise environment? What are the things to, and it sounds like you embrace this. Like, often I hear founders have a very negative experience, and maybe you did, and you're being optimistic about how, or like rose-colored glasses in terms of what you're sharing with it, which I appreciate. It's nice to hear that, because I often hear the opposite. But from your perspective, what are the things to learn? Like, what are the ways that founders can think optimistically about, hey, your journey into enterprise or into a much larger company, that this is an opportunity for you? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I just working with so many other smart people that I didn't have access to before, or so
Mm.
much that I just had to like figure out. Now I had access to data. I had someone to like build, as we're building our new pricing strategy. I had a pricing person that was like building extremely complex spreadsheets with me to like figure out all these different models and what would make sense. Um, and I think a lot of what I learned too is just like how, working with other people in a different way, and how to, yeah, be productive within that environment.
Mm.
What I really took advantage of a lot of the things that Adobe had to offer as well, from like career growth and management. That's a big one as
Mm.
well, is like having all these different tiers of managers and understanding really long-term strategy
Mm.
as well.
Mhm.
Where in a startup, you're like, yeah, so much, okay, let's go, go, go. Like, we'll make a tweak here, change this and that. At Adobe, it's like, we have this strategy that's a several year strategy that Wall Street is bought into as well.
Right.
Uh, with a really good CEO. I mean, I can't say enough good things about Adobe, because it really was a great company. And for me, it being the first time in that world, it really opened my eyes to like, oh, this is how grown-ups do things. Um, and I think putting strategies out there and even delivering messages internally in a succinct way is one of the big things that I learned, where I think we are used to sending a lot of emails back and forth, right? One word things here and there, and just like, okay, we're making some progress, but what did we just decide in any of that? Um, my manager at Adobe in the later years was so good at identifying and like coming out of a conversation saying, here's what we learned, here's our priorities, and here's our next steps.
Mm.
Like, let's outline this in a succinct way. We all agree and we all know how we're moving forward. Um, just that type of communication that and like that muscle that I had to build being at Adobe, I think helped me in a lot of ways in one, being a better communicator and working with large teams and collaborating in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is just making me like synthesize things more.
Mm.
So, okay, now I just finished this. Like, it's not just this laundry list of to dos. Like, let's actually look and say, okay, let's summarize what were our goals. And it made me kind of like evaluate steps along the way and decide what not to do or where to spend my time and attention because I'm actually looking at that versus just saying, okay, back to my to-do list of 100 things that I have to start checking off.
To me, this is endlessly fascinating. Just the your journey and how you started from the startup framework and the startup mentality to product to growth to into enterprise, like that. I'm so intrigued by that journey because I know that there are people that are hungry to learn from that story, and I don't feel like that holistic story is told enough. So I really, really appreciate that. So for you, what's next? Like, how are you thinking about the future now? You've gone through you have this amazing wealth of experience, amazing skill set. What's next for you?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I left Adobe was I just wasn't passionate about marketing software anymore. I think I I want to be working on a product that I really, not that I didn't believe in that product, but a product that I'm passionate about, that I care about using, and that is something that's just more related to my own interests.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I've, the last few months have gotten into consulting, my real goal here is just to try more things and figure out what I do and don't like. I think it's been really interesting for me right now. I took on maybe more projects than I should have, but I did that on purpose too, to be like, let's just start trying things
Yeah.
and understanding what direction I want to go in. And I think what I have learned in the past 2 months about my next path is I want to be working with smart people on a team. I think that is just a huge aspect. I think in consulting, I will get to work with teams, but it's a little different. Like I like the collaboration aspect and want to make sure I maintain that. And that I want to be building things. I think I've been doing, and this is a constant struggle between product management and product marketing. Depends on what organization you're in. Everyone looks at it differently, and the lines can be very blurred.
Mm-hmm.
And product marketing tends to get pegged in this outbound, right? Product is let's understand the customer problems and let's build products for them. And then product marketing is let's take these products that you've built and now let's make sure that we're messaging that in a valuable way to our customers. When I looked at product marketing previously, I see it as that full spectrum. And I think a lot of people do, of understanding the market and their problems and being that customer expert. But the part that I'm realizing is like, I don't care as much about the words that go out. Like, I want to understand the customer and their problems and be part of building that product that's going to meet those needs. So I think that's a lot of what is drawing me back to startup, I think, is that at a bigger company, you have to be more specialized, and I'm going to get pegged in that product marketing outbound role that is just less interesting to me. But I think everything that I've learned along the way, to me, the important parts of product marketing really is the strategic side. So I think about it more as like, okay, I think product strategy is actually the direction that I want to go. And I think going back to a startup, these titles and roles and responsibilities is not as important as getting the work done and, getting on the same page and having that understanding. And so that's what's kind of bringing me back to, if I can work in some of the earlier stages where I can be hands-on with the build versus like a big company where product management might be more of like that, the engineering side, as I mentioned, and like managing a backlog and some of that. But if you focus too much on one or the other, I think I miss the magic of like really the connecting the dots between the product, the market, and the customer.
Mm. Well, this is amazing. Thank you for sharing the story. There's so many parts of this I'm very excited to share with the community. So, last question: where can people find you online if they're interested in contacting you and continuing the conversation?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn, or I have a website, jennalanger.com. Pretty bare bones, but I'd say pretty much on purpose as well. And I love exploring new projects and hearing new ideas. So definitely just feel free to reach out on either of those channels, and I'd love to, talk to you about your product, or, at some point I'll hopefully be having my own ideas that might start my own company. So I'm excited to just be part of the Proto Network, be connected back to entrepreneurs and startups. And I'm just so excited about innovation that's happening, across the industry right now, and, want to be involved.
Amazing. Jenna, thank you. Really appreciate your time. This has been great.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Proto Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you and your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it'd be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.